And also, you need the wire. Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. And the other thing is, you've come a long way to receive these awards. You are allowed to speak as long as you like. But remember, everyone always remembers the shorter remarks. So, do a standing ovation, please. It's an honor to be here tonight to recognize colleagues who put their lives on the line to bring us stories from overseas, and who've overcome not just the danger of the front lines, but also other perils, like talking bosses into letting them cover a story in a time of shrinking news budgets, and also winning back an audience that is sometimes distracted by problems of their own back here. What you do reminds them that there is a world out there that needs their attention, sometimes their help, and also puts their own problems back into perspective. For that, we thank you, your bosses, and the Overseas Press Club for recognizing that. With that, we start with the first of these 20 awards this evening, the Hal Boyle Award for the Best Newspaper or News Service Reporting from Abroad. Sponsored by AT&T, it goes to Farnaz Fasihi of the Wall Street Journal. Farnaz grew up in Iran, so she was able to use her knowledge of the country, especially her native Farsi, putting that to work to put a human face on the tumultuous post-election Iran. Farnaz.
Thank you, Overseas Press Club, for honoring me with this award. I'd also like to thank my outstanding editors at the Wall Street Journal for their guidance and support through one of the most challenging assignments I've had as a journalist. Iran captured the attention of the world this year because of its presidential election and the violent aftermath. But the country's downward spiral from a path of reform to dictatorship was evident to those of us who've been covering it for a few years. They told me to tell a story here, so I'm going to tell the story of how I got stuck with students in 2003, and then again this past year as a kind of an anecdote of how much things have changed. In July 2003, I attended a press conference in Tehran organized by the main student activist group advocating for democracy. We left the building chit-chatting with the students about where to have lunch. It was a normal summer day. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a burly man jumped on the students, pulled a gun to his head, and grabbed him away. Another gunman jumped on another student, about a feet away from where we were standing. The students kicked and screamed. The journalist screamed, "Where are you taking them?" He briefly pointed his gun at us, a small group of foreign reporters, and told us to shut up. We stood there shocked, not knowing what to do. Several students were still inside the building. They shouted from the window and asked us to go back inside. Back then, they thought that foreign reporters would shelter them. They thought that if we were there, perhaps they wouldn't raid and take the rest of them away. That afternoon, we spent about 9 hours staying there as human shields for the students. Iran still had a reformist president and a government in place, so we were able to work our contacts and work the phones, calling parliament members, the president's office, and Tehran's police chief. Gunmen waited for us outside. Eventually, teams of police officers were dispatched, and we all left the area escorted and safe. Last June, I found myself in a similar situation, with a drastically different outcome. A peaceful opposition protest turned bloody as militia opened fire on the crowd. A young man in his 20s was shot in the neck in front of me. Other people dragged his bloody body to an empty office and a side street. People were leaving the room with their doors open so protesters could escape. It was a chaotic and intense scene. The young wounded man was on the floor bleeding. He was slipping into a coma. Someone kept slapping in his face and going, "Please don't go." A young woman cried. I frantically took notes. Mobile networks and phones were jammed. Even when we were able to reach hospitals, they wouldn't send an ambulance because the address was too close to the protests. The commotion grew outside. The militia had entered the alleyway looking for us. They were banging on the doors. Gunshots rang all around us, and we heard smashing glass. The students looked at me anxiously. They clearly didn't want me there. An American journalist was a liability, not a protection. As a sign of how things had changed, I had nobody to call. Nearly all my sources were in jail or in hiding. I slipped through the door and went to an upstairs neighbor's house who sheltered me for several hours. I never found out if the young men died or if we survived, or if the young students, the men and women, were arrested. The next day, the government agency in charge of Foreign Press Office called me. They said they were spreading a rumor that I had been spotted and shot. They told me that they're happy I'm safe, but I should take that as a warning sign. I was lucky to leave Iran after a few weeks, although I later learned that an arrest warrant had been prepared for me. Dozens of my colleagues remain in jail, and others have been forced into exile living as refugees. As I stand here safe and accept this award, I'd also like to thank you and think that by honoring me, you've also honored them. Thank you.